Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Planning Committee. The Service Manager for Communities is present, Mr. Pegram, and the Monitoring Officer is also present, Mrs. Sull. Thank you. We start with the agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitute members, please.
Apologies from Councillor Richard Butler. So Councillor Maureen Stockwood will be chairing the meeting, and the substitute for Councillor Richard Butler is Councillor John Stockwood.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of May, pages 1 to 4 in the agenda. Is it your wish that I sign those as a true record? You all indicate with your hand, please. Thank you. We start immediately with the planning applications. The first one is application number 19/01206/4, 151 Melton Road. It's a proposed secondary driveway off Stamford Road, the erection of proposed detached garage and the demolition of part of the boundary wall. Mr. Pegram, could you take us through the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll share my screen with you.
Thank you.
The first application, as you say, relates to 151 Melton Road. This is actually two applications. It's a joint report, so it covers an application, as you say, for a driveway and the erection of the detached double garage and the demolition of the wall. The site is within the conservation area, so the application or the report also addresses the need for planning permission for relevant demolition in a conservation area, and that relates to the demolition of part of the boundary wall to form the access. So the property in question is this one on the corner of Melton Road and Stamford Road. It's a detached property. The current access is from Melton Road with a double garage in this position. The dwelling is adjacent to the southern boundary of the site, and the property has a garden or amenity area which effectively runs around the west, north and eastern side of the property. That's looking at the property from the opposite side of the junction. So we're looking south, effectively up Melton Road, Stamford Road coming off around the corner here. And the property in question is the property on the corner, which you can see here in the background. The boundary to the pavement is defined by a Bulwell stone wall. Also acts as a retaining wall because much of the site is at a higher level than the adjacent highway. And you can also see there is hedgerow and landscaping around the edge of the garden area. That's now standing further up Melton Road looking south. So the property is down in the distance on the corner. If we move a bit closer in, the property is over on the right here. And then looking into the property from the existing access on Melton Road, so you see it's quite a large detached property, has an existing double garage and driveway access in this area here. This is now on Stamford Road, so this is the boundary wall to the property. There is, as you've seen referred to in the report, there's a street tree, quite a prominent one, which sits in that position. Moving closer in, again showing the street tree, and the proposal here would be to demolish a section of the wall, roughly as I'm indicating, to form an access into the property. The gap in the wall initially would be opened up at 7.2 metres, and that is to provide a 3.75 metre wide driveway with 1.5 metre visibility displays for pedestrians. So effectively the wall would curve in to the driveway from the edge of the back edge of the pavement. That's looking head on, and we now start to see the neighbouring property, number 2A. This is, you'll see there's an objection from this property in the report, detailed in the report. Again, you see the street tree. And then stepping further down the road, looking back in a generally southwesterly direction, again, the tree, the application property in the background there, and number 2A here. That's a bit closer look at number 2A. Part of the concern from this residence is that their lounge is located at the front of the property. You'll see it does have quite a large picture window facing north. You'll see from other photographs that that property also has a secondary window to that room in the western elevation facing the application site. And the concern, as you can see detailed in the report, or one of the concerns, is about potential for loss of light or loss of sunlight to that room. And I'll deal with that separately in a moment. Again, just looking westerly down Stamford Road, number 2A and the application property. And we're in the application site now. So this is stood on the existing driveway, looking effectively north. So Melton Road is to the left. Stamford Road runs off behind the hedgerow effectively. And again, the prominent tree as a point of reference for marking where that is. That's now looking east towards number 2A. So this is effectively the area in the foreground here is where the proposed detached garage would be constructed. The access would come in opposite side of the tree into the property with a driveway and turning area in front of the garage. Moving closer in, you can now start to see the window in the side elevation of number 2A, which, as I say, is a secondary window to that lounge accommodation. And there it is again. And I understand this one is a cloakroom. That's looking more of a southerly direction across the rear of the application property number 151. So that's effectively part of their private amenity area at the rear of the property. And then again, just looking across in a generally northwesterly direction. So Stamford Road is behind the hedgerow here. And again, more northerly, again, picking up that tree for point of reference. So that's the layout of the property as you've seen in the photographs. Existing access from Melton Road, existing detached double garage, large detached property with garden area surrounding. And the proposal is to construct a detached double garage in that position, to demolish part of the boundary wall, reconstruct using Bulwell stone reclaimed from the demolition, reconstruct walls with a curved visibility display for pedestrians, and then up the driveway into the garage. There will also be two drains, one at the top of the drive there and one at the bottom, which are designed to catch the rainwater so that rainwater doesn't run down off onto the public highway. You can see the bottom four images of the garage, very simple construction, pyramidal roof, and it's approximately 3.9 meters to the highest part of the roof. And the distance from the front of the garage to the neighbouring boundary here is approximately 16 meters. That's just an artist's impression, if you like, to show the proposal. The tree's been sort of ghosted out, so you can still see the details. You can see where the driveway would come in, walls constructed on the curve, as I've described, and the garage sat in that position. So, Chairman, the main considerations really in relation to this application, firstly, is the impact on the neighbouring property at 2A, highway considerations, and also perhaps one of the most fundamental issues is that the site is within the conservation area. And as you're aware, under Section 72 of the Listed Building Conservation Areas Act, we are required to give regard to the desirability for preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the area. I'll come back to that in some detail in just a moment. So in terms of the potential impact on the neighbouring property, as I've often said, I would never say there is no impact from development. In this instance, though, Chairman, it's considered that because the garage is some 16 metres from that boundary, the potential impact on that property would be limited in my view. As you saw, the room with at the front of the building is the lounge. It does have the large window on the north facing elevation, secondary window in the west. Likely that any impact on possible sunlight would be restricted to later in the afternoon or early evening, and particularly in the winter when the sun is lower in the sky. But I think, as you've seen from the photographs, there are already a number of obstructions to the passage of light, including the existing dwelling and the natural growth. So it's not believed that the impact on that property would be significant. Highways have looked at the application. They are satisfied with the proposal. It has been amended to improve the visibility displays for pedestrians at the entrance to the site. And also, you probably can't make out, but maybe just in faint, there is a 2.4 by 43 metre visibility display for vehicle visibility in each. That is acceptable on a road of this type. Chairman, probably, as I say, one of the most fundamental issues is the impact on the conservation area. The wall is identified as a feature in the conservation area appraisal, and therefore any loss of that wall must be deemed as having some harm on to the character and appearance of the area. That harm in officers' view is less than substantial, and it's probably described as minimal at the lower end of less than substantial. Nevertheless, as decision makers, you are required to give any harm substantial weight. And in this instance, you need to balance the harm against other factors and the public benefits. Probably worth noting that the wall on that elevation, on that street frontage, is about 40 metres. Running down here is another roughly 40 metres. So in all told, the wall is about 80 metres long, and you're losing, or would be losing, approximately 7 metres of that wall. Officers don't consider that to be a significant loss, although, as I say, strictly speaking, that does cause some harm. You'll see in the report, Chairman, that officers have looked at what benefits might arise. Clearly, Melton Road is a busy distributor road. Stamford Road is probably arguably described as a quieter residential road, but providing an alternative access would give the property owner the option of using this, potentially reducing use of this access here, and it's therefore felt that that benefit to highway safety and wider public benefit. On that basis, Chairman, your officers have considered that that does outweigh the minimal harm caused by the loss of the wall. The county forestry officer is satisfied that that tree can be retained, so there's no harm to the tree or the contribution that makes to the character of the area. Chairman, after careful consideration, officers have forwarded this to you with a recommendation. There's two recommendations. One, to grant planning permission for the demolition of the wall, access and the detached garage. The other is recommending that the planning permission is given for relevant demolition within the conservation area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Mr. Machin has sent a letter in, which is unable to be present, and it will be read out on his behalf by Mrs. Tambili.
Hello, Councillor Stockwood. Yes, I will start reading the statement now.
Thank you.
Members of the Planning Committee, in support of the applications, we wish to make the following comments. The application proposal is for a secondary driveway access and domestic garage to an existing detached dwelling, 151 Melton Road. The site is within an established residential area. As such, the principle of development of a secondary entrance and garage serving an existing residential dwelling is acceptable. Melton Road is an incredibly busy road, and a new driveway would mean that the existing access off Melton Road could be used less often in the interests of highway and pedestrian safety. The proposal requires a small section of the existing stone boundary wall to be removed, but as the total length of the wall is some 80 metres, it is not considered that the removal of a small part of it would cause any undue planning harm. The The council's conservation officer states in the committee report that the proposed access point is approximately 4.5 metres and that this would only represent a small proportion of the length of the frontage. Furthermore, the existing and proposed accesses are not seen together in the same views, as one is on Stamford Road and one on Melton Road. It is stated that the vast majority of the wall would remain to continue making a positive contribution to the character of the area. In terms of the new drive, the materials from the demolished section of wall would be repurposed and utilised in the new curved boundary entrance, and then also in the retaining wall, for which views will be available up the new driveway. Additional planting would also be made to the top of the walls, and overall the proposed material finish and design of the entrance is considered complementary to the character and appearance of the area. County Highways and the council's tree officer have been consulted throughout the applications and raised no objection. Careful consideration has been given to ensure successful retention of the street tree, and conditions are recommended with respect of driveway drainage, landscaping, materials and construction of the drop curb new footway. The new garage has been traditionally designed in keeping with the existing dwelling. In the committee report, the planning officer states that the new garage would not be prominent within any street scene. Overall, the proposed garage would be considered sympathetic and subservient to the character and appearance of the existing dwelling and wider area, and would not be considered to represent overdevelopment of the site. On behalf of the applicant, we have worked positively with the council's planning team and statutory consultees to address any prior concerns, and we hope as members you will now follow the recommendation of the council's planning department and grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out in the report. That's the end, Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you very much. We also have Councillor Gowland that wishes to speak to this.
Thank you. So thanks very much for listening to me speak. I won't go into all the details of this, the issues the neighbours have with this particular plan. I think it suffices to say, I think Mr Pegram must have spent a lot of time at the top of Stamford Road, because this is actually neighbouring another, adjacent to another planning sort of black spot over the last few months. This is a really majestic wall. Even before I became a councillor living in Lady Bay, I was fully aware of the walls up here, you know, at the top of Melton Road and Stamford Road. It's a majestic, substantial space, part of the environment for the whole of the residents of the area to enjoy. So I think any change to it is significant, and I don't actually consider 10% to be insignificant. Is substantial, and I don't consider 10% to be insignificant. It's also very close to a large tree on the street, as you saw, and although that visibility splay was described, I mean, the tree is right in the middle of that visibility splay, and so there is a risk of people having a blind spot in the position of that tree. And I think we also have to worry about the potential risks of the tree, because the building will be quite close to it. We also have to notice that as a result of this extra drive, the coverage of this plot will be almost completely hardcored or hard standing or hard surfacing. This is a very elevated area, an exceptionally elevated plot around compared to surrounding roads, you know, a metre or several metres, I think. Rainfall onto that area is going to struggle to cope with any drain. So the risk of it just pouring down onto Stamford Road must be significant. I know that extra drains have been put in at the later amendments, and that's obviously a good thing. But I think we have to worry about how the water is going to escape from that raised, elevated and largely enclosed in walled plot onto the road. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pegram, did you wish to answer any of those points first?
Not at this moment in time, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, would any other councillors wish to speak, please? Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for a clarification, Mr. Pegram, on the wall, when you talk about it being 80 metres and this only representing a 7-metre loss, is the 80 metres the wall only as it pertains to that particular property? Because from the photographs, it looks like it's one consistent wall that goes all the way to the neighbouring property before their drive curves in. So is it actually 80 metres as a complete wall, or is it longer than that?
No, in terms of what's identified in the character appraisal for the area, or the landscape appraisal, there's quite significant lengths of Borewell stone wall or walls which are considered to contribute to the character of the area. The 80 metres is simply the frontage of this particular property. So the frontage probably measures a total of about 80 metres. You've got the existing access within that 80 metres on the Melton Road frontage, and this would be an additional access within that 80 metres on the Stamford Road frontage.
So the actual wall without break is more than 80 metres. Along the front of the neighbouring property as an entirety, as a single entity.
You take into account the neighbouring properties, yes. I've got another plan which I haven't got on the screen, but yes, there are other breaks in that wall though. As you go up Melton Road, the properties do have access from Melton Road into their properties. So it's not a continuous run of wall, but yes, there are more extensive lengths of Borewell stone wall in the area generally.
Thank you. Councillor Verdi, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Acknowledging the benefits of having the secondary drive from Stamford Road, as identified on page 17, paragraph 44, the officer has clearly highlighted the point that this is an A road, Melton Road, and therefore reducing the possible conflicts is clearly a benefit. However, also noting the Conservation Officer's remarks on page 11, paragraph 12, regarding the garage in terms of it could be reversed, thus avoiding the secondary entrance. I'm just wondering whether that was a consideration which was put to the applicant, or whether there is a specific reason why that hasn't been considered. Mr. Pegram?
Chairman, yes, sorry, I was waiting to presume. Chairman, yes, I think that suggestion has been put to the applicant by the case officer throughout the application history. Clearly, they wanted it considered as submitted. As we've said before in committee, members must consider the scheme which is before them, not potential alternatives to the application. So you must consider this one on the face of it, and notwithstanding that there might be an alternative solution. Clearly, if the proposal resulted in the closure of the existing access on Melton Road, that would be of significant benefit to highway safety. However, it's felt that even if that is retained, this does give the property owner alternative access to the property and potentially reduces the use of that access.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got 5 things, really, questions and observations. The first is about the wall. The Conservation Officer did state that there would be harm to the conservation area by putting an entrance in the wall, although I take the point that it's been this is being balanced against other factors. My second point really is the orientation of the garage. It presents blank walls to it's on a corner plot, and it presents blank walls to both streets, which is a negative impact on the street scene and contrary to building designs standards such as Building for Life. The third thing is a question really. Does it extend forward the building line on Stamford Road? Does it bring the building line forward towards Stamford Road? The fourth thing is a question of how many garages does the property currently have? I did try to follow this through the planning application history, but I got a bit lost. And the fifth thing I'd also noted was whether or not the tree was in the way of the visibility display, which Councillor Gowland mentioned. So I would like that cleared up, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pegram.
Thank you, Chairman. Don't need those, actually. I need to look at the big screen. I'm going to share my screen with you again, Chairman, because the plan I've got answers most of these queries, so bear with me. So can everyone now see the plan on the screen?
Yes.
Good. So, Chairman, in terms of the various questions that have been asked, in terms of how many garages the property currently has, it has an existing double garage here, so that's parking for 2 cars, effectively. This one is the proposed one, so currently just 1 garage. In terms of the impact of the walls, yes, those 2 walls, which face Stamford Road and Melton Road, would be blank walls. However, Chairman, you did see from the photographs that the sides of the garage is elevated above the road, and there is some natural growth along both boundaries. So the garage would largely be screened from public view, and therefore would not be considered to be unacceptable. In terms of the building line on Stamford Road, it sits closer to the road than the host property, yes. Properties further along Stamford Road, you can just see faintly marked here, are closer to the road. It's not something, Chairman, which I would advocate we should be hard and fast on in terms of preserving a building line. It does depend on the character of the area. And I think because there are varying distances from the road, we haven't got a regimented building line that would suggest that encroachment into this area should necessarily be sacrosanct. In terms of I think the final point, if I'm right, is the impact of the tree. And again, you can see the tree marked just there. It does sit close to the curb side of the pavement. You can probably just see marked on the plan, there are visibility displays, which I'm indicating. And those are 2.4 metres by 43. Now, the way that they are calculated, Chairman, and the way it works, you measure from the edge of the carriageway back 2.4 metres, and then depending on the speed of the road, you measure out the appropriate distance to see if there is adequate visibility. I think it's fair to say that, yes, at points when a car emerges from this driveway, there may be a point where the tree provides some obstruction to the view of the driver. This seems to suggest, Chairman, that your bonnet would be closer to the road, but the driver would see initially behind the tree for any vehicles coming down Stamford Road. So it has been looked at by Highways, Chairman. They are very keen to retain the tree. Notwithstanding the retention of the tree, they are satisfied that the proposal would provide adequate visibility for drivers. I think that does answer the queries that Councillor Thomas raised.
Thank you. Is that all right, Councillor Thomas? Have you anything further to add?
The only thing I'd comment would be that it is on elevated ground. As far as the street scene is concerned, it is on elevated ground, and the greenery could be removed. The wall itself is not very high. It would be above the wall, particularly on the Stamford Road elevation.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Would anyone like to move the motion and recommendation? Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've listened carefully to the debate. I've looked carefully at the presentation. It is the case that the conservation is harmed, the conservation area is harmed, but in looking carefully at the conditions that are put for the application, including the reuse of the stone and particularly the landscaping scheme, I feel that there are sufficient measures that the scheme is acceptable in those terms. So I move the recommendation as written on page 18, and I'll move the related demolition one as well, if at the same time, or I can do that separately if upon the advice you receive from your officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Verdi? Would you wish to speak, Councillor Verdi?
No, I'm just really reiterating what Councillor Stockwood has said, Chair, that acknowledging the harmful effects to the conservation area, I think the benefits of some of the benefits identified are justifiable in terms of the recommendations.
Thank you. So we now go to the vote, please. Am I taking the vote or the monitoring officer? Do we just show hands, please?
Mr. Chairman, can I clarify for members then, the motion is moving the recommendation on both applications by Councillor Verdi. I'm satisfied, unless the monitoring officer considers contrary, that the application can be taken as one because the development is linked effectively. You can't implement the development without the demolition of the wall. So, as I say, just to reiterate, the motion made by Councillor Stockwood was to move both recommendations, seconded by Councillor Verdi.
Yes, thank you. Is that confirmed by the monitoring officer?
Yes, yes, Chairman, it is. It's one vote on the both on the application in its entirety.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do the roll call, and unless you want to do it, I've got no preference.
Thank you. Would you like to do it? Then I'm not influencing.
No problem. Councillor Thomas, can you indicate how you wish to vote? 4. Councillor Brennan? 4. Councillor Verdi?
4.
Councillor John Stockwood?
4.
Councillor M Stockwood?
4.
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just moving to the second application this afternoon. This application is 20/00635/4. This is 148 Harrow Road. And it's for a single-storey side extension to the garage, first floor rear extension and a loft conversion with a side dormer and gable end to the rear of the property. And please note this is a resubmission. Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Could you take us through the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick correction in the report before I start. Paragraph 3, fourth line down, refers to a 400-metre gap to the neighbourhood. That should actually read 400 millimetres, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application then seeks planning permission for a single-storey side extension to garage, first floor rear extension and a loft conversion with a hip to gable roof extension. Chairman, at this point, it's probably worth mentioning that this development has been approved previously. The application before you relates to a relatively minor change to the single-storey side extension. And if I can find my pointer, I will share my screen with you and we'll run through the presentation. So, Chairman, the application in question number 148 is the property here outlined in red. Has a garage on the southern side, which is quite common of the properties on this side of Harrow Road. That's the property in question. So there's a gap between the house and the neighbouring property, and just out of shot is the garage to the neighbouring property. The garage to number 148 is on the left-hand side of this shot. So again, that shows you the relationship with the neighbouring property. So this is the application site, and this is the neighbouring property with their garage. That's the other side of the application property. So that's the garage belonging to number 148. And just to, I'm sure Councillor Jones will raise it again, you see that characteristic gap, which is repeated up the streets with house, gap, garage, house, gap, garage, so on. That's in the rear garden, looking generally westerly direction. And then that's looking down the northern side of the application property, showing the gap between the two properties. So this is the garage neighbouring property, and there has been an extension to the rear of that previously. That's the existing single-storey extension on the rear of the application property with the two-storey element above. And then looking in a northerly direction across the patio, so the garden's on the right, the house is on the left. And then that's looking down the northern side of the application property with the back door to the garage. So just again, that's the application property as you saw outlined previously. This is the block plan of the property. And then that's the existing configuration, the roof plan of the property, single-storey extension to the rear beyond that line there. That's the existing elevations, and again you can see the existing single-storey extension to the rear and existing floor plans. So the proposal, Chairman, is for on the back a two-storey extension which wraps round the side, the northern side of that property. So effectively that's the existing rear wall, see faintly marked. So a first floor or two-storey extension in that position, wrapping round partly over the garage. There's a loft conversion and a dormer constructed on the southern slope of the roof. So that's the gable facing the garden. The dormer would have a slope on the front, so it would appear as a, sorry, wrong elevation. It would appear as a sloped roof in that plane, but then flat elevation to the dormer there with a flat roof running through to the rear. And then at ground floor, and this is the element where the change occurs, is a single-storey extension on the side of the property. Just to help pick out that, Chairman, I've produced these which show, sorry, that is the proposed floor plan at ground floor, proposed floor plan at first floor, I should say. And then the second floor with the loft conversion within the dormer and the roof space. As I was going to come on to say, these are produced to show the changes between the approved scheme. So the ones on the left are approved. The ones on the right are the current scheme, which is before you. As you'll see, largely, it's virtually identical to the previous approval. The difference is here, when you look from the front, previously that side extension was a straight line down the side of the property. Part way back, it now steps out to the side by about 255 millimetres. Again, left-hand side is approved, right-hand side is proposed. And again, the only change you'll probably identify is here where the extension steps out approximately midway through the extension. And then again here, you can see the previous approval was for a straight wall down through the side of the property. And now proposal is to step the extension out by about 255 millimetres to that was previously approved. Chairman, the scheme is a relatively minor change to something which has already been approved, and on that basis, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a ward representative, Councillor Jones, wishing to speak on this application. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll start off as I meant to say, but I will address the Mr. Pegram's comments. I still think it's contrary to MPPF section 12 about achieving well-designed places. In other words, the plan is not sympathetic to the area, and it's out of character with the rhythm of the street scene. as you'll have seen on Harrow Road, the properties all preserve a side access on the northern side. And where applications have been made, they've usually gone over the garage to the south side and at the back. This application seeks to both replace the garage on one side with an extension there, leaving a very small passageway, but to extend the property so far to the north that it obliterates this characteristic side passageway. So that is my view, is why it's totally out of keeping with the character of the street scene. Now, amongst the reasons for that consistent pattern of side passageways to the north are access to the substantial rear garden, refuse bin access, and the deeds of such properties which require the access along that side in order to maintain the gutter and the wall or anything on that wall of that neighbouring property. Whilst the planning considerations don't seem to have regard to such practical matters or indeed legal deeds, it still seems unwise for a planning committee to approve a plan which disregards those. If I expect, as I expect the planning officers advise the committee that these are not in current planning law, I respectfully suggest that the chair asks for comments to be made seeking such change to the appropriate national body. It is true that the applicant shifted a previous application so that there was a gap of 400 millimeters, which there's a ruler, and it's not much longer than a ruler, right? Now, it was less, in my view, it was less ideal, but at least it made slightly less impact on the street scene. But to describe the only change being to take the back wall further out to the neighbouring property, leaving only 6 inches basically, both obliterates the view down the side of that house, and that's my argument about the street scene. But equally importantly, the neighbour at 146, the neighbouring property, they've moved out partly as a result of this application. The neighbouring property inset their rear wall, I think as you were shown in one of the photographs, so that they've got a utility in that back extension, and their gas boiler outlet and utility water discharges onto their land, which is why they indented it. By this application building right up to the boundary, it means there's only 6 inches, and without doubt that creates a pinch point so that any ability to replace or repair those outlets in the long run makes that utility of that property unworkable, and therefore I think it impacts on the amenity of the neighbouring property. So there's the daylight issue from the front, and there's the impact on the amenity of the neighbouring properties. And my final comment is the officer's report doesn't condition the recommendation on having a box gutter, i.e. no overhang. And if the committee were to approve this application, I suggest that such a condition is made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Pegram, there's several points to answer there. Do you wish to answer them at the moment?
Yes, Chair. If I just pick up on a couple of them, I'll again share my screen with you, which I hope you can see the plan on the screen. Councillor Jones made reference to deeds which impose a restriction that this type of development cannot take place. Councillor Jones obviously acknowledged that that is not currently a planning matter. The planning system cannot seek to duplicate controls under other legislation, and even if this permission were to be granted, and indeed we've already granted permission for an extension down the side, if there is such a clause in a deed, then the owner of the property would need to seek to address that separately outside of the planning regime. It's similar, Chairman, I would suggest if you were to consider an application for the change of use of a premises from a shop to public house or drinking establishment, they would need to go away and get a license to be able to operate that premises. And in some respects, it demonstrates that sometimes there are other elements of legislation which have to be complied with. There is, down this side, there would be retained, albeit through a covered passageway, a route through. The original garage was effectively that section at the front, which, given the size of modern cars, I would argue could not accommodate a car. So the garage performs no real function in that respect, and passageway would be retained, albeit a covered passageway down the side of the property. Chairman, in terms of the suggestion that the proposal is constructed with a boxed gutter, you have to consider what is before you. If you conditioned a box gutter, you'd effectively be seeking to change the plans. Plans do show a conventional gutter on the outside of the wall, and that is what you are being asked to consider. If I go back to this plan, the gap at the front here between the two properties would be retained at 400 millimetres. A similar gap would be retained at the back of 400 millimetres. And I don't know if you can make it out, but it's just this section in the middle here where the gap would drop down to around about between 120 and 150 millimetres, so approximately 4 inches. In terms of the impact on the street scene, Chairman, again, we have already approved a single-storey extension in this position. Indeed, a single-storey extension could be potentially constructed in that position under permitted development. I would suggest that the point at which the extension would step out is so far back that it will have hardly any discernible impact on the street scene, and not a factor, in my view, Chairman, which would sustain refusal of planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for councillors' contributions now. Councillor Gowland, please.
Thank you. I'm not muted, am I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I have to say I've had an increasing concern since I've become on this committee and I've started looking at housing in the area and realising how many of these extensions go right up to the boundaries. And it really is a significant loss of amenity. I mean, if it's in the deeds, that's presumably protecting it anyhow. But if you can't get to your roof, or if you're blocking the space between houses, you know, the loss of amenity could be a real physical loss in terms of damp. If we can't have circulation of air, we're sort of heading towards, you know, the sorts of things that we tried to pull down 100 years ago. I think having houses built with small gaps between them, even, you know, a few inches, doesn't sound healthy to me. And I think that I consider this a loss of amenity. You know, not being able to have air blowing beside your house is not good. Now, clearly, if everybody builds to their boundaries, that's their problem to some extent. But if there's a kind of definition in the road that we build to one boundary but not to the other, then it seems appropriate to me that everybody sticks to it.
Thank you. Any points to answer on that?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments from councillors? Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. Just to absolutely clarify the space between the two, because people keep bandying around millimetres, centimetres, inches, feet. What exactly is the gap between the two properties? Is it sufficient for maintenance purposes, even before the pinch point and after the pinch point? That's my first thing. I have less concern about the impact on the street scene because the pattern of those houses does not seem to me to have particular architectural merit. And in any event, we've already approved this, as far as I can see, and we're only approving a minor change to something which has already done the damage in terms of changing the pattern of the street scene. But I am concerned about the lack of ability to maintain utilities in the neighbouring property. And I'm not entirely clear what the gaps are because people have been using different measurements, imperial and metric. So could we be absolutely clear what the gaps are, please?
Thank you. Mr. Pegram has put.
If I may, just to clarify that point, the gap is shown here. You can't read it probably on your screen, but the gap is shown here. Wall to wall would be 400 millimetres. Similarly, at the back, wall to wall would be 400 millimetres. Clearly, there would be an overhang of the gutter, which would bring it closer to that. So that would close the gap, in fairness. It's at this point here, Chairman, where there's a very slight, small section. The plan shows this at 120 millimetres wall to wall. In terms of the concerns about maintenance, that is a private matter between the individuals. It's not a planning issue. I would probably have to admit that it's not sensible always to build up to the boundary. It does create these sorts of problems. However, it's a private matter, Chairman, which would be dealt with privately between the parties concerned. And also, given the proximity of that work to the boundary, it's likely that this would be subject to provisions under the Party Wall Act. And it's the Party Wall Act which is intended to protect the interests of individuals for that matter. So as I said previously, there's multiple strands of legislation that may apply when someone wants to build an extension of this nature. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gowland, do you wish to come back?
So in terms of maintenance, I mean, there is, no sensible way that these people can maintain these properties in going forward with a gap that's just about not big enough for a human to squeeze through, and part of the gap not really big enough to get your hand through. There is no sensible way short of removing one of the houses. So I think that must count as a loss of amenity. And I would second the suggestion from Councillor Jones that maybe we should ask the planning, the chair of this committee, to write to the Secretary of State to suggest that it should be concluded as an amenity to be able to get next to your property, next to external walls.
Thank you. I think actually precedent has been set many, many times that you can build up to your boundary, no matter the impact on the neighbouring properties. So we've been through this many, many times. I see that Councillor Thomas wishes to speak next, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Mr. Pegram could explain the issue with the overhanging gutter and comment on the proposed condition by Councillor Jones, which I don't quite understand.
Yes, Chair. The effectively a conventional gutter is screwed to the fascia on the eaves of the house, and you see it overhanging the wall, basically. A box gutter or an internal gutter would be where you carry the wall on above the level of the eaves, and you effectively then create the roof comes down, and you effectively create a channel behind that wall, and that means that the gutter does not then overhang the eaves of the property. So that would be a box gutter. My point on that was that you are being asked to consider the plans that are before you. Any condition would effectively require a change to the plans, and as we've said before, you have to consider the application before you. Chairman, just on the issue of amenities and this point that's raised about maintenance, hopefully may be confirmed by the monitoring officer, my concern, or what concerns planning officers when we're looking at amenities, is how it impacts on people's enjoyment of their property. So it's about noise, overshadowing, overlooking, loss of privacy, loss of light, those types of issues. What you are raising in the debate is more what I would call a matter of inconvenience. It's not a matter which relates, in my view, to the amenities of the property. And as I've said, it is a private matter between the individuals, which is legislated for through the Party Wall Act and other legislation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Stockwood, you indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I downloaded my copy of the papers from Tinternet, and it finishes on page 29 with a blank page. It's my experience that sometimes we have notes to applicants, and I think it would perhaps be beneficial if we had an informative about the Party Wall Act, and that where deeds, there's been a suggestion that deeds have relevant terms, that we advise the applicant that it is their responsibility to comply with their legal obligations, and that this is clearly included in the any decision that we make this evening, that those note to applicants are included at the base of of any decision. Can I just ask that those 2 points be considered, please?
Thank you. I can see some members nodding their heads on that. Councillor Thomas, did you wish to come back?
Could I just clarify with Mr. Pegram, we are not able to suggest conditions that the pinch point isn't present and that the gutters don't overhang. Is that true?
Effectively, yes. The plans show a pinch point. The plans show a conventional gutter construction. On that basis, that is what you're being asked to consider. And indeed, probably, yes, condition 2 says the development hereby permitted shall be carried out in accordance with the following approved plans. Any change from that, we'd need to ask the applicant, whether he's willing to change the plans, but we would have to get revisions to the plans if that change were to be incorporated.
So our only option would be to refuse the application at this stage, if we wanted those changes to be made.
You have an option to refuse. Clearly, I'd be happy to advise on any suggested reasons for refusal.
Councillor Brennan?
Thank you, Chair. Well, can I support Councillor Stockwood's view? I think that seems a very pragmatic and practical way forward and addresses our concerns, but within the context of the decision making that we're undertaking here. So I'd like to support Councillor Stockwood's recommendation for notes to applicants on the 2, I think it was the 2 points that you made. And on that basis, I'd like to move that we accept the recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Have you a seconder? Councillor Verdi? You wish to speak at all?
Yes, I mean, just thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, I think, having listened to the deliberations and particularly yourself highlighting the fact that the precedent for building up to boundary walls has already been set. It's not something we're necessarily discussing here. And also noting there are numerous examples of similar extensions in the area already. This is an approved application with these minor changes. And also, you know, the neighbouring amenities not being a material planning consideration, as the officers highlighted. I think, you know, I'm quite happy to second Councillor Brennan's motion that we approve this application.
Thank you very much. No further speakers. We've had the recommendation moved by Councillor Brennan, second by Councillor Verdi. We go to the vote, please. And the recommendation is, of course, to approve.
Councillor Thomas, can you indicate your vote, please?
Against.
Councillor Brennan?
For.
Councillor Verdi?
For.
Councillor M. Stockwood?
For.
Councillor J. Stockwood?
For.
Councillor Gowland? Sorry, Councillor Gowland, you're muted.
Against. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that is the end of the applications this afternoon. I thank everyone for their attendance and bearing with me as I chair this meeting. Virtual meetings are not the easiest ones, but I hope you have enjoyed it anyway. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.